Hi folks, I'm working on some online video lectures for my myth class right now on this subject. So I thought I would go ahead and do the vocab for this week based on what I'm talking about with that class, and that is the Vanir gods. Now the singular is Vanir, so one such god is a Vanir. I think that word only occurs once, although it's easy also to infer that would be the singular. The plural Vanir, mirroring Asir, the other family of gods, may look like a feminine plural to you if you've only looked at the basic type of masculine nouns, the A stems in Old Norse, but this is an I stem, hence the plural in Ir rather than Ar. The most canonical Vanir god is Njordr. Now, the exact origin of his name is unknown. There's a lot of speculation about it. But one truly curious fact is that the Roman writer Tacitus, almost or more than 1,000 years before our Norse sources, depending on if you're dating our sources to when they were orally composed or written down, he talked about a goddess worshipped by some Germanic tribes whose name he gave as Nerthus. Now, Nerthus is exactly what we would expect the name of the god Njordr to be in Proto-Germanic. So there's a question here. Was there once a twin pair, god and goddess, with the same name? There may well have been, since Loki accuses Njordr of having had his children, Freyr and Freya, who notice are another twinned pair of Vanir gods, with his own sister. His sister is never named in our Old Norse sources, but we might infer from Tacitus's remark that perhaps his sister was also named Njordr or something very close to that. It is not 100% certain, since in the Prose Edda, Snorri makes it sound like Skadi is the other parent of Freyr and Freya. He does say that Njordr had them after he was married to Skadi. Whereas in Heimskringla, in the saga of the Inglings, Snorri says that Njordr had already had Freyr and Freya with his sister, something he probably got from Lokasenna, before he came to Oscarder. So that's a little bit uncertain. It's also just possible that in some places Njordr was a goddess, in some places a god, or that Tacitus misunderstood this is a goddess when in fact it was a male god. We don't know, but I think it's most likely that what lies behind this is that at some point there was a twinned pair, Njordr and Njordr, male and female twins. But I can't prove that, so speculation. Now his children are Freyr and Freya. These probably are not their original names, as these names are simply titles. Freyr meaning lord, which can be used as a man's title in early poetry, and Freya meaning lady or noblewoman, which also can be used as a woman's title, not just in early poetry, but even in prose. So that in the sagas, the Hus Freya, the house lady, is the lady of the house and has no reference to the goddess. So their names are probably not their original names. What might their original names have been? One name that we see Freya referred to often is Yngvi, and so that probably is his original name. The early kings of Norway are the Ynglingar, which are the descendants of Yngvi, meaning Freyr. And then Freya's original name might well have been Frigg. I've gone on at some length in a video that I made about Freya and Frigg about how I think that at some places and some times Freya and Frigg were probably considered the same goddess. Whether that is originally the case or the two were originally distinct and later got confused, I don't know for sure, but it is possible that her original name was Frigg. Frigg meaning love would actually be a pretty appropriate name for Freya. Now, the spouses of these gods, Njordr is married to Skadi. Her name, by the way, is related to German Schade, as in Schadenfreude, pain. It's also related to English scathe, like I'm unscathed by these remarks or something like that, uninjured. She is originally a Jotun woman and marries Njordr after the gods kill her father Thjatsi. Remember this colorful story where she has to choose a god to marry by his feet. This is part of what the gods offer her in compensation for her dead father. And she chooses Njordur because he has the cleanest feet, but she thinks that the cleanest, best-looking feet are going to belong to Baldur. She's disappointed they don't have a happy marriage. Freyr is married to Gerður, also a Jotun woman. All of this implying that the Vanir men are of lower status than the Aesir because they don't seem to be able to marry Aesir women. And then Freyja is married to Óðr, which I would put in scare quotes. Óðr is the adjective meaning mad, as in angry or crazy, same ambiguity as mad has in English, so I'm very deliberately choosing that translation. And that is, you may notice, the very same word in Odin's name. Odin is the mad one, right? Weak form of the adjective Óði plus the article in. Now, I think it is basically impossible that Óðr isn't Odin. That Odin, who has more than 80 names, doesn't also own the name that is just a variant of his own name, beggars the imagination to me. I'll eat my hat if anybody can make me think different. This could be a reflection of the confusion in the tradition between Frigg and Freyja. I think it is more likely that than that we need to presume that Freyja and Frigg are so stupid that they can't tell that they're both married to the same man. Although no one seems to recognize Odin in disguise, so I guess who can say definitively. Another god who may be among the Vanir is Heimdallr. He is called Vanir in a stanza in Thrymskvida. I think it's stanza 14. Off the top of my head, could be 15. I think it's 14. In that same stanza, however, he's also called one of the Aesir. It is very likely that in poetry, the word Vanir can be used actually for any god, unfortunately, with you just having to kind of infer whether it's meant in its broad sense as just a poetic synonym for any god, or in its specific sense as a term for this particular family of gods. Think about the way that the word cowboy can be used to mean something very specific, a man who works cattle, but also in a very general sense, just used as a description for anything that's associated with the U.S. West, right? A cowboy boot, which is worn by a lot more people than people who make a living breaking horses. In the same way, Vanir does have a specific meaning of this family of gods, but also in poetry, if you need a word for God that alliterates with V, you can use Vanir for any of them, is my strong suspicion about how this works, and part of why we are so confused about this Aesir-Vanir distinction. You might also compare the way that if you were writing a poem about, let's say, a falcon in English, and it was a rhyming poem, and you ended a line with shock, and you couldn't think of anything else that rhymed with shock, and let's presume you also have a dialect like mine, and shock and hawk rhyme. In the next line, you might end the line with hawk, knowing that people remember that it's a falcon, not a hawk, but knowing that falcon and hawk are close enough that they know what you're talking about, that you're just using a poetic near synonym to get that rhyme in. Same way, I think Vanir is a poetic near synonym for God that sometimes they're just using for alliteration, and that isn't actually descriptive of the membership in this class. Two other beings that might be Vanir are Bragi and Idun, Bragi being a minor god associated with poetry, and Idun, of course, being the one who holds the apples that keep the gods young. She is memorably stolen in the story of how Skadi comes to be among the gods. Anyway, the reason I say they may be Vanir actually isn't based on anything too firm, except for the fact that they seem to come up in the same breath as gods we know are Vanir. For instance, the only story where Idun really has much to do with anything is the story where she's kidnapped and eventually by Thjazi, Skadi's father, and eventually Skadi joins the gods. I can't say for sure, but just the way that she comes up in association with the Vanir gods sort of suggests to me that she's part of the chunk of mythology that is incorporated into broader Norse mythology from the stories about the Vanir, who I vaguely suspect are basically originally regionally distinct gods, probably especially associated with Sweden, who later get incorporated to greater or lesser degrees into the pantheon of the rest of Scandinavia, but never quite completely incorporated. They really do seem to be of lower status than the Aesir, at least in the Icelandic sources that we are forced to rely on because they are basically all that survives in terms of writing. All right, well, I've put some cards up with links to related videos. I'll also put a couple in the end screen here where you can follow up about some of these older videos you might not have seen before. And from beautiful Colorado in the Utah Raptor room, as usual, I'm wishing you all the best.